There's a lot of visitors here this morning. This is going to be very interesting. You picked an interesting Sunday to be here. What I'm about to present in summary form for the first half of what I'm going to say today is in full form for free with my booklets in the gift shop. So feel free to stop in there. It's a little green booklet and you will have the full text. I'm only going to do it, therefore, in summary fashion. I'll also email it out. But this being the first Sunday of my 4th year at St. Jude's, I wanted to do a little situation report. The first part of this is, again, in a document that's going to be in the gift shop. If you want to understand my approach to all things in the parish, and for those of you who are not exactly happy about certain things, especially, then you need to understand profoundly the fact that we are at war. Life is not business as usual. It's not what we have been used to most of our lives. Obviously, the devil has been attacking us since the very beginning. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about an all-out assault on the Holy Catholic faith. And just as in World War II, everything in this country shifted to a war footing, and everything that was done in this country was to contribute to the war effort, we have to also have that same attitude as Christians. We are not experiencing the usual peacetime conditions and therefore cannot have that expectation. This fight, which has been more subtle in some recent years, is now fully in the light, and only those with their heads in the sand or other places do not recognize it. We cannot afford to wallow in the luxury of comfort and rest. We have to take our usual R&R, of course, rest and relaxation, like I'm doing this week, but we cannot afford to wallow in luxury. Everyone needs to be trained for this combat well, and especially our children and our youth, because we are all combatants in this war. If we are at war, then we have enemies, and we want to be aware of how to fight enemy number one. When we lament the state of the world, and it's in a very sorry state, we have to remember, though, that the world is a community of individuals. Our war is for individual souls. It's not for the state of the world, our country, etc. It's individual souls. And the only soul, as I've said before, and which you really need to grasp, is that you are accountable for your choices, is your own soul. Fundamentally, our goal then is to bring the disorder in our soul caused by sin back into order by humility. Now, this doesn't mean that we neglect other souls. Certainly, we pray and offer sacrifices for other souls. And we certainly should explain and teach, but we're not always going to be able to convince. And the longer I'm at this, the more I realize the more people are unconvincible for whatever reason. As soldiers of Christ, we want to be very clear, though, that we are not an army of one. I told you last Sunday to pay attention to that line from Genesis. It is not good for the man to be alone. And this applies to all states of life. We were all meant for community at all states of life, at all stages of our life. And on earth, this takes two principal forms. On the natural level, of course, it's the family. And on the supernatural level, it's the church. Obviously, we mean the universal church. We could also refer to the diocese, but on a practical level, we mean the parish church, which is meant to be our community. It's one of the reasons why I've been slowly working on this idea of sectors. We started with catechism, and I'd like it to grow to other areas where we actually get to know our fellow Catholics who live near us in our sectors so that we can support each other on a more day-to-day basis, both spiritually and in a practical way as well. The church also needs to take back what the government has usurped. The services which the church founded and established and continued and have only recently been usurped by the government. We need to reclaim especially things like health care, and education. Hospitals and the university system are a gift of the Catholic Church, not of the state. If we are at war, we have an enemy, and that enemy has a plan. And to a large extent, most of that plan involves a fiduciary gubernatorial alliance between the banks and the world governments. We went from men being able to support their family with the support of the local community to most people being a slave of the banks in some form and to traditional currency. And for the sake of certain benefits, most people are bound by loans, mortgages, credit cards, or rely unnecessarily on welfare, unemployment, the guaranteed minimum wage, Social Security, Medicare, and are at the mercy of pharmaceutical companies. Yes, there are benefits, but this, as a system, this doesn't make for a healthy society. Basically, what this creates is indefinite indentured servitude. And this, of course, makes people easier to control. This control is introduced and strengthened by our government-dictated education system. Our children are taught outright errors, whether it be in the texts themselves or in the ideologues who are teaching in our schools, including here in Maybank, Texas. And most people are convinced that they are obligated, for the sake of their own welfare, to enter an undergraduate program which is going to leave them in great debt, again, enslaving them to the banks. And to ensure that no one recognizes what's going on, great care has been given to an elaborate, coordinated effort by the mass media to keep us divided along whatever lines and entertained. Our attention is therefore turned from the boredom, which is our natural state, without God in our hearts, and I mean completely in our hearts, to a myriad of distractions in the form of social media and products from the entertainment industry. This is the zombie apocalypse. We're living it right now, and it's horrific. We cannot fight this war if we don't have the right attitude. We want to avoid the extremes. Again, one of them on one side being anxiety. The reason is because we want to avoid anxiety because that's always rooted in some kind of spiritual pride. There's also a self-righteousness in our anxiety in which we're speaking ill of the people who are the culprits of this, speaking of them as them and not us. And we tend to generalize about groups, about any groups, and without recognizing in humility that the line between good and evil runs down the heart of each one of us. The other extreme then is apathy. Apathy is what keeps people cogs in a system because they want to be content. It requires effort to do things differently. And those who are apathetic then are more easily controlled. The virtue between these two, of course, is resignation, where we trust in God's providence. We cannot choose when we live, but only how we live. And as the saints say, do what you can, therefore, and pray for what you can't. And the only way to win this war, then, is by living personal holiness in deliberate community. Which brings us to this community. Just wanted to share some comments this morning. Again, at the beginning of my 4th year here, based on my observations, and hopefully they will be motivating and maybe even consoling. We'll see. The first thing I want to say is that I love this parish. I have no intention of leaving, much to the chagrin of some people. Of course, but what I want is my intentions don't actually count, although I do plan on putting my foot down with the bishop as necessary. This is really, in a lot of ways, a typical parish. It's not different from many of the others that I've experienced or that I hear about. But I will say that, particularly in St. Jude's, and again, I guess it's really not that unique, but I do know that very specifically in St. Jude's, we are in a time of transition. And I know that most people recognize it, and many people lament it, but it needs to be accepted in humility, and that is that we are in a time of transition. It's a generation of very active, engaged people who, due to infirmity, or in some cases death, are not able to do what they are used to doing and make happen the things that they used to make happen, which on their part requires the humility to recognize that fact. And it also requires that a new generation of people step up, people who are not used to volunteering and engaging, because in the past, the same people always did everything, and those people are not doing it anymore. We've, of course, also been through the unprecedented experience of coronapocalypse, which completely disrupted life. Well, not completely. We haven't seen complete disruption yet, but that's coming. But has really disrupted life, especially in the church, and I think that we've accommodated to it fairly well here. But I want to remind you of something which I may have said before, but if not, I want to be very clear, because it's very important that we understand this. My perspective, because I am Catholic, is not congregational. I am not interested in this parish as an organization, nor as a collection of organizations. I'm interested in this parish as individual souls and their salvation, which of course requires cooperation amongst each other. But this is not just our church. This is the church, and we are participating in it as members. And I'm not interested in merely numbers or showing off outward results. I'm interested in the growth and personal sanctity of the members, which results in growth, but that's not the primary goal. On a personal level, anyone with experience in the church needs to recognize the fact that no priest is perfect, including the ones you really like. Even the people who like their priests have a tendency to overlook faults. And certainly, please overlook faults. But the point is that don't decide on that based on whether you like the priest or not. I know that in my sinfulness or my weakness, I may have truly offended people, for which I apologize. And I'm certainly aware of my deficiencies that come from my defensiveness, my ADHD, and my trying to do too much. And I know I'm aware of them, and I'm working on them. It's just very, very slow. But for those who might be unhappy because of what the decisions I make, the message I preach, or what I do, all I can say is that I'm going to listen to the words of the Lord through the prophet Ezekiel. Ezekiel is told, "Mortal, I have made you a sentinel for the house of Israel. Whenever you hear a word from my mouth, you shall give them warning from me. If I say to the wicked, you shall surely die, and you give them no warning, or speak to warn the wicked from their wicked way, in order to save their life, those wicked persons shall die for their iniquity. But their blood I will require at your hand. But if you warn the wicked, and they do not turn from their wickedness or from their wicked ways, they shall die for their iniquity, but you will have saved your life." This is why I'm accused of being too hard, or like someone who's left for Athens was told someone down there that my preaching sounds like you're always in the principal's office. That says more about the listener than it does the preacher. According to St. Jean-Marie Vianney, the Curé de Ars, if a priest is determined not to lose his soul, so soon as any disorder arises in the parish, he must trample underfoot all human considerations, that's a way of saying people's opinions, as well as the fear of the contempt and hatred of the people. He must not allow anything to bar his way in the discharge of his duty, even where he is certain of being murdered on coming down from the pulpit. A pastor who wants to do his duty must keep his sword in hand at all times. Or the words of St. Alphonsus Marie de Liguori, who said, "St. Prosper says that to save his own soul it will not be enough for a priest to lead a holy life, for he shall be damned with those that he lost through his fault." The Council of Cologne declared that if a person take the order of priesthood without the intention of performing the office of Vicar of Jesus Christ or of saving souls, a great and certain chastisement is reserved for him, as for a wolf and a robber, which he is called in the gospel. Now, with that being said, I really actually do admire the people the longtime parishioners who haven't given up despite their discontent in certain things. And of course, I'd like a chance to talk about that more. It's imperative that we avoid gossip and idle conversation because it's a sin, but it's also bad for the spiritual health of individuals and communities. Ultimately, when I care what people think, it's not for my own sake. I mean, certainly I do actually have feelings, and I do get hurt. But what more bothers me, and parents should be able to identify with this, is when people walk away, I'm hurt because I'm offering them the best that I can, and they are rejecting it. So how is the parish actually doing? Well, there are objective measures to the health of a parish, which you may or may not be aware of or agree with, but here they are. The amount of time that people spend in Eucharistic adoration, attendance at Holy Mass, but particularly weekdays, confession times and the attendance thereat, and vocations. We used to have more people making visits to the Blessed Sacrament. I'd like to see that increase again. Of course, there was that hiccup there with all that fear through coronapocalypse. And certainly the mothers in our school, for example, do make their visits, which is very beautiful to see. There is still a serious deficiency in confessions. If we recognize the need for confession, including our venial sins, then we would come regularly, especially monthly, even if all you have is venial sins, thank God, and bring your children. There's also very inconsistent Mass attendance. There's a lot of factors for that, including on Sundays. Some of it's just things that can't be helped. There is traveling that goes on, etc., etc. But I don't think that accounts for all of the fluctuations. And finally, no matter how much good I may have done here, and I'm not wallowing in self-pity, I've seen lots of fruits here, and it's beautiful, and I appreciate it, I will still always feel like a failure when I hear people who know better talking unnecessarily in the church. By unnecessarily, I mean pretty much at all. So let me just share a couple of specific areas that I want to comment on. I'm certainly very grateful for the corps of volunteers who do most of the work in the parish. There are a number of people who have really poured themselves into the apostolate here, and it's bearing much fruit, and it's helping me greatly, and so I'm very grateful. I know that it's typical in parishes that 10% of the people do 90% of the work, but just because that's typical doesn't make it right. The other 90 need to get their butt in gear a little bit more. So get involved, especially in light of the wartime conditions that I spoke about. Too many people in this parish are passive. We need to be proactive, to offer to help instead of complaining, and don't wait for me to ask. Again, ADHD. I'm usually not going to keep track of those things very well. That's one of my frustrations, is I'm not organized enough, and therefore I'm having trouble organizing the parish. We need more men involved in general. God designed you men to be the religious leaders, whether you or your wives like it or not. So man up. I am grateful that I have noticed the Knights of Columbus are taking a little bit more of an interest in trying to promote my mission, which is very good, and I appreciate that. But I need more men in more areas. I desperately need help organizing, although, like I said, most of that's internal, so God help anyone who tries to help me in that. But I will accept some help in that area, hopefully. I desperately need bilingual help. If you haven't noticed, there are a lot of Spanish speakers in this parish, including at this Mass. And I need some help in that area because while my Spanish is certainly better than just, a couple of slang words, I certainly am not fluent. We certainly also need people more involved with the sick and the homebound. We have a lot of people in our parish who need to be visited, to spend time with them, to stay connected because they're not able to get out. And that needs to be done. If you're willing to help with that, speak with me, please. And again, we need to fortify relationships within the parish. It's one of the reasons, like I said, for dividing the parish into sectors. We have now, for all practical purposes, a school, which is a very beautiful thing. The St. Jude Academy, our homeschool cooperative, has 35 children, is being sustained by a handful a small handful of volunteers, including a non-Catholic neighbor of a Mass goer here, and a Catholic couple who drive an hour and a half one way just to come once a week to help. So we need a little more local help. Our St. Teresa Apostolate is great. Those are some of my best volunteers in the parish. Thank you very much, ladies. But they need more volunteers. In a parish with this many retirees, it shouldn't be a problem finding more volunteers, especially men. This parish has some amazing young people. You see a lot of them here. You see a lot of them participating and active. They've received their formation very well. But they also need more good examples from adults. I do not have enough volunteers to help with the youth, especially men. We have the best altar servers in the diocese. We could easily have the best handmaids in the diocese if I had some more adult supervision. Not so much from 9 a.m. We're okay. You're all right. Although you probably would appreciate some help. Yes. And family catechism is in its second year and it's going well. It's been difficult because the parents are actually having to do the teaching instead of just dumping their kids off for an hour and expecting us to do everything. So it's been difficult, but the families that have persevered and are actually continuing in the program have found it to be very fruitful, and it's a better way of doing things, and they've grown because of it. So, in summary, we are doing well, despite my perfectionism. But we have a long way to go. God must be rendered greater glory by more souls, and there are a lot more souls that need saving.